The knock on my door wasn't just loud, it rattled the windows. I opened it to find two men in cheap uniforms, flashing fake badges, demanding I comply with HOA regulations. My blood boiled. I never signed up for the HOA. I never agreed to pay them, and yet, they stood there threatening me, saying I'd regret it if I didn't join. What they didn't know, though, was that the very ground their office sat on belonged to me. Every brick, every desk, every file in their so-called headquarters rested on land I legally owned. They thought they could bully me with fake cops and false power, but they had just picked the worst fight of their lives. Because when someone builds an empire on stolen ground, one single truth can bring the whole thing crashing down, and I was ready to make sure it did. When I first set my eyes on the land, I knew it was where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. After years of working long hours in a gray cubicle, surrounded by endless noise and demands, I was desperate for peace. I found that peace in a wide stretch of property just outside a quiet town, the kind of place where mornings were filled with birdsong and evenings melted into crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The land was more than I had dreamed of. Hills with patches of forest, a small pond that mirrored the sky, and an old cabin that, with a little fixing up, would become my retreat from the chaos I had left behind. I didn't buy the land for profit, or for appearances, or even to make new connections. I bought it for myself. I signed the papers with the county office, collected every deed, survey, and boundary line record, and locked them up carefully. I wasn't careless about ownership. I made sure my name was on every line that mattered. My land was my land, and I didn't owe anyone a thing. That thought comforted me more than I realized. The first few months were bliss. I spent my mornings repairing the cabin's porch, hammering down new planks where old ones had rotted through. Afternoons were filled with clearing brush and planting a small garden that would one day grow tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. Evenings, I would sit with a cup of coffee on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees while the world quieted. For once in my life, I felt I was breathing freely. No bosses breathing down my neck, no endless emails, no traffic jams that ate hours of my time. Just me, the land, and the peace I had worked so hard to find. That was when the knock came. It was late morning, and I was out by the garden, pulling weeds. A shadow fell across me, and I looked up to see a woman in a sharp red blazer. Her hair, pinned tightly back, her lips painted the same shade as her jacket. She was the kind of woman who carried herself as though the ground belonged to her. She didn't smile when she introduced herself. "I'm Marjorie," she said, her voice crisp and practiced. "President of the Lakeview Homeowners Association." I straightened slowly, wiping the dirt from my hands. "Homeowners Association?" I repeated. "I think you have the wrong place. This isn't part of a subdivision." Her lips pressed into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it is. All properties in this area fall under our HOA. You're required to join. There are monthly dues, reasonable really, and certain rules that must be followed. For example, no visible sheds, no gardens taller than 2 feet, and of course, paint colors must be approved by the board." I couldn't help but laugh. "You must be mistaken. I didn't buy into any HOA. My land is independent." I checked. That smile of hers faded, just slightly, but her eyes sharpened. "Sir, everyone joins. It's for the good of the community. Rules keep order. You wouldn't want to be the one standing in the way, would you?" Her tone was sweet, but beneath it I heard the warning, like a snake hissing softly before it strikes. I leaned on my shovel, meeting her gaze. "No, I didn't buy this land to be told what to do. I won't be joining your HOA. Have a nice day." Her jaw clenched, though she tried to mask it with another brittle smile. "Think it over. I'll be back." She turned sharply and walked away, her heels clicking like little hammers against the gravel of my driveway. I thought that was the end of it. I thought she'd realize her mistake, move on, and leave me alone. I was wrong. A week later, I was inside repairing a window frame when the pounding began. It wasn't a knock, it was a fist slamming hard enough to rattle the glass. I opened the door, and 2 men stood there in uniforms that looked like they'd been bought from a Halloween store clearance bin. Their badges caught the light, but even at a glance, I could tell they were fake. "Mr. Carter," one of them asked, his voice firm. "We're here on behalf of the Lakeview HOA. You've failed to comply with community regulations. This is your final warning." I stared at them, dumbfounded. "What regulations? I don't belong to your HOA. You're required to," the other one said. He was taller, with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl. "Failure to comply will result in fines. Continued refusal will result in legal action. You could even be removed from your property." I stepped outside onto the porch, folding my arms. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Authorized officers of the HOA," the shorter one replied, flashing his fake badge like it meant something. That was when I laughed, loud and sharp. "Authorized officers? You're not cops. Those badges aren't real. You're trying to intimidate me, and it's not going to work." Buzzcut's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." I took one step closer, lowering my voice. "No, gentlemen, the only thing I regret is opening the door. Get off my land before I call the real police." They exchanged a look, then stepped back. "This isn't over," the shorter one muttered. They turned and walked away, their boots crunching down the gravel. I stood there, watching until they were out of sight, my hands clenched into fists. My heart pounded with anger, not fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of papers, the deed, the survey maps, the boundaries clearly marked. I read them line by line, reassuring myself that I was right. That's when my eyes landed on something curious. A shaded rectangle on the map, labeled Community Office. The lot number fell squarely inside the boundaries of my land. I pulled the larger survey out, spread it across the table, and traced the lines again. My finger ran along the edge of my property, down to the shaded rectangle. There it was. The HOA's precious office, their so-called headquarters, was sitting on ground that legally belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. All their threats, their fake cops, their bullying, every ounce of their power was built on stolen ground. They thought they were untouchable, but the truth was right here in black and white. I didn't just own my cabin, my pond, my garden. I owned the land under their office. A slow, fierce smile spread across my face. They thought they could scare me into joining them. They thought they could push me around with lies and intimidation. But they had no idea the ground they stood on wasn't theirs at all. And now, I had the one thing they could never fake. Proof. The next morning, as the sun broke over the trees, I packed the deed folder under my arm and headed toward their office. My anger had cooled into something sharper, more dangerous: determination. They had tried to scare me with threats and fake authority, but soon, they were about to learn what real authority looked like. This was just the beginning. The HOA office sat at the end of a freshly paved road. Its white walls and green trim meant to look welcoming, but to me, it looked more like a fortress built on arrogance. A shiny new sign hung above the entrance: Lakeview Homeowners Association Headquarters. It struck me as almost laughable, knowing what I now knew, that every inch of that office sat squarely on my land. As I approached the building, I could feel eyes on me. A few people stood outside, chatting in the morning sun, their voices low. They went quiet as I walked up, the folder tucked tightly under my arm. I wasn't here to play games anymore. I pushed the glass door open and stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and cheap carpet. A young receptionist looked up from behind her desk, blinking at me through thick glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but wary. "Yes," I said. "I need to speak with the president of the HOA. Tell her it's urgent." She hesitated, glancing at the folder I carried, then nodded quickly. One moment, she disappeared through a side door, her shoes tapping down the hall. Moments later, Marjorie appeared, her red blazer, as sharp as the day I first met her. Her expression shifted the moment she saw me, her carefully practiced smile tugging at her lips. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly. "What a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. Have you reconsidered your position about joining us?" "Not exactly," I replied, stepping forward. I laid the folder on the counter and opened it, spreading the documents wide so she couldn't ignore them. "This is the deed to my land, and according to these maps, your entire office, every wall, every brick is sitting on my property." The room went still. Even the receptionist leaned closer, her eyes wide. Marjorie's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered. "That's an interesting interpretation," she said lightly, though I saw the flicker of panic behind her eyes. "But I assure you, Mr. Carter, our office has been here for years. It's part of the community." I tapped the map with my finger, hard enough to echo in the silence. "I don't care how long it's been here. This land belongs to me. I bought it legally, and you've been trespassing." For a moment, her composure cracked, her lips tightened, and her eyes narrowed into cold slits. "Do you really think you can walk in here, wave a few papers around, and threaten us? This community has rules. Everyone abides by them." I met her stare without flinching. "Not me. Not anymore. You sent fake cops to my door. You tried to intimidate me into joining your scheme. But here's the truth. You've been running your entire operation on stolen land. And now, I want you off it." The receptionist gasped. Softly, Marjorie shot her a glare that silenced her instantly. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Careful, Mr. Carter. You don't know who you're dealing with. The HOA has connections. We can make life very unpleasant for you." I gathered the papers calmly and slid them back into the folder. "Try me," I said, "because the next call I make is to the sheriff. And when he sees this," I held up, "but deed, you won't just lose your office, you will be facing charges." Her eyes burned into me as I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the receptionist whisper something, her voice trembling, but I didn't catch the words. The door swung shut, and the cool morning air hit my face like a relief. My hands were steady, but inside, I could feel the storm brewing. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I knew they wouldn't take it quietly. That night, I kept the deed folder on the kitchen table, the papers spread out like a shield. I thought about what Marjorie had said: "We can make life unpleasant for you." It wasn't an idle threat. The HOA had already sent fake cops. What would they try next? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I stepped outside to find a bright yellow notice nailed to the post at the end of my driveway. It was stamped with the HOA seal and filled with bold letters: Notice of violation. According to them, I was in breach of community regulations for having an unapproved garden, an unsightly shed, and failing to pay association dues. They demanded immediate payment of $2,500 in fines. I tore the notice down and crumpled it in my fist. They were escalating. If they thought a piece of paper would scare me, they were dead wrong. But still, my anger simmered hot in my chest. They weren't just pushing anymore, they were trying to bleed me dry. Make me surrender through harassment. Later that day, I drove into town and stopped by the county records office. The clerk, a friendly man named Dave, helped me pull every document tied to my property. I wanted to be sure, beyond all doubt, that my claim was airtight. Together, we spread the maps across the counter. Dave traced the boundary lines with his finger, nodding. Yep, he said, no mistake here. That office is definitely sitting on your land. Looks like it was built years ago, maybe before you bought the property. But the ownership lines haven't changed. It's yours, plain and simple. Then how did the HOA get away with it? I asked. He shrugged. Sometimes people don't ask questions. Sometimes no one notices. Until now. I thanked him and left, clutching the stack of certified copies he'd provided. As I drove back, I couldn't help but think of the neighbors, how many of them had been bullied into paying dues, into following rules that had no real legal backing. If the HOA's headquarters wasn't even on their land, what else were they faking that evening? I sat on my porch with the documents in hand, staring out at the sunset. The land stretched wide before me, beautiful and silent, but I could feel the tension pressing in from all sides. The HOA wouldn't stop. Marjorie wouldn't back down. She was the kind of woman who would rather burn everything to the ground than admit she'd lost control. Sure enough, just after dark, headlights swept across my driveway. I set the papers aside and stepped into the yard as a black SUV rolled to a stop. The doors opened, and out stepped the same two men who had come before the so-called officers. Evening, Mr. Carter, Buzzcut said, his tone oily with false authority. We hear you've been making trouble. I folded my arms, standing firm. The only trouble here is you trespassing on my property again. The shorter one smirked. You think your little papers will save you. This community runs on respect. People like you outsiders, you don't last long. I stepped closer, my voice steady. Those papers are more than enough. I own the land you're standing on. I own the land under your office. And soon, the sheriff's going to know every detail. For a moment, the two men hesitated. Then Buzzcut sneered, shaking his head. You're making a mistake. People who fight the HOA, they always regret it. Maybe, I said, my voice low. But people who steal land and impersonate cops, they end up in jail. The words hung heavy in the air. Neither man replied. Finally, they climbed back into their SUV and drove off, gravel spitting beneath their tires. I stood there, the night air cool against my skin, watching until their taillights vanished into the darkness. I knew then that the fight had only just begun. They wouldn't give up quietly, but neither would I. They had built their empire on lies, and I was about to pull the ground out from beneath them. This wasn't just about my peace anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could take whatever they wanted. And for the first time in years, I felt a fire burning in my chest, not fear, not anger, but resolve. The HOA wanted a war. Well, I was ready to give them one. The morning after the SUV confrontation, I rose early, the weight of what was coming heavy on my shoulders. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The HOA had crossed lines that couldn't be ignored. Fake cops, harassment, illegal fines. And now that I had undeniable proof their office was built on my land, it was time to bring the law into this fight. I gathered everything. The deed, the certified maps from the county office, copies of the notices they'd left on my property, and even photographs of the fake officers at my door. I slid it all neatly into a binder, labeling each section. If I was going to the sheriff, I wanted everything in order. I wasn't just some angry landowner. I was a man with facts, evidence, and the truth on my side. By mid-morning, I was pulling into the county sheriff's department, a brick building with faded paint, but an air of authority that the HOA could never fake. Inside, the reception area smelled faintly of coffee and dust. A deputy at the desk looked up as I entered, his expression neutral. Morning, I said. I need to file a report. It's about impersonation, fraud, and trespassing. That got his attention. He gestured toward a set of chairs. Take a seat. Sheriff Walker will see you in a moment. I sat, my binder resting on my knees. Minutes stretched, my mind running through every possible outcome. Would the sheriff believe me? Would they brush it off as a civil dispute? My jaw clenched. No, I had the proof. They couldn't ignore it. Finally, a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face stepped out from an office down the hall. His uniform was crisp, his presence commanding. Mr. Carter? He asked, his voice deep and steady. Yes, sir. I'm Sheriff Walker. Come on back. His office was cluttered but orderly, shelves stacked with binders and a bulletin board filled with notices and photos. He motioned for me to sit, and I placed my binder on his desk, opening it carefully. Sheriff, I began. I moved here a few months ago. I bought land outside of town. Everything is in my name, legal and recorded. But the HOA here, the Lakeview Association, has been harassing me. They claim I'm required to join, even though I never signed anything. They sent men to my house, pretending to be officers, flashing fake badges, threatening fines and removal, and last week, I discovered something even bigger. Their entire office building is on my land. I walked him through everything, page by page, the deed, the maps, the notices, the photos. He studied each document carefully, his brow furrowing deeper as I spoke. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, the weight of the evidence sinking in. Finally, Sheriff Walker leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Mr. Carter, this isn't just harassment, this is serious. If what you're showing me is accurate, we've got impersonation of law enforcement, attempted extortion, and illegal occupation of private property. That's a mess of charges." Relief washed through me, though I kept my voice steady. "So you believe me?" He nodded firmly. "I do, and I'm going to act on it. But I need to handle this carefully. The HOA has been around a long time. They've got influence, and I've heard whispers of shady behavior before. But this," he tapped the deed. "This gives us something solid." He closed the binder and looked me straight in the eye. "Here's what I'm going to do. I'll open a formal investigation. I'll have deputies verify the property lines and ownership records, and I'll be paying a visit to that office myself. In the meantime, if they approach you again, you call me directly. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. And, Mr. Carter," he paused, his voice lowering, "you've made some enemies here. Be careful. People like this, when cornered, they can get desperate." I left the sheriff's office with a strange mix of fear and determination swirling inside me. On one hand, I finally had the law on my side. On the other, I knew the HOA wouldn't take this lying down. They'd push back, maybe harder than ever before. That evening, I kept my porch light on and a phone in my pocket, half expecting another SUV to roll up. But the night was quiet, the stars sharp and clear above the tree line. For a moment, I almost allowed myself to relax. The next day, though, the storm broke. It started when I drove into town to pick up supplies. As I stepped out of my truck in the hardware store parking lot, I noticed people staring, whispering. A woman I didn't even know shook her head as she passed me. Then, I saw the flyers. Bright, bold letters screamed across the page. "Dangerous neighbor refuses to follow community rules." Underneath, there was a grainy photo of me standing in my driveway, arms crossed, looking irritated. They made it sound like I was some kind of threat to families, a man unwilling to cooperate with the safety and standards of the neighborhood. The flyer even claimed I had threatened HOA officials with violence. A complete fabrication. My stomach churned with anger as I tore one down. They were trying to turn the town against me, to paint me as a villain. This was their counterattack, their smear campaign, and it was working. People I passed in the store looked at me differently, like I was dangerous. When I got home, there were more flyers nailed to my mailbox, tucked under my door, even tossed onto my porch. I collected them all, adding them to the growing pile of evidence. If the HOA thought lies would break me, they were wrong. They had no idea how stubborn I could be. 2 days later, Sheriff Walker called. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice steady, "we've confirmed your property lines. There's no doubt the HOA office is on your land, and we've also confirmed those men who came to your door aren't licensed officers or security. They're impersonating law enforcement. I've got enough to move forward." I felt my chest loosen, the first true breath of relief in weeks. "So what happens now?" "I'll be paying Marjorie and her board a visit, but I want you to be prepared. They won't take kindly to this. Stay alert. Keep that phone close." That afternoon, I watched from my porch as 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled past my property, heading down the road toward the HOA office. My pulse raced. I could almost imagine the scene unfolding, the look on Marjorie's face when she realized the law had finally come knocking. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. It was Sheriff Walker. He stepped out of his cruiser, his expression serious. "Well?" I asked, my heart pounding. He took off his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "We confronted them, showed them the evidence. They denied it, of course, claimed the office was grandfathered in, claimed your maps were wrong, even accused you of harassment. But they weren't laughing when I told them investigators would be surveying the property and checking their finances. Let's just say, the board isn't as confident as they were before." I leaned against the porch rail, exhaling slowly. "So it's happening," he confirmed. "But listen, Mr. Carter, this isn't over. They're rattled, and that makes them dangerous. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to retaliate before we can finish the investigation. You keep your doors locked, you understand, and call me at the first sign of trouble." I nodded. "I will." That night, I sat by the window, the glow of a lamp casting shadows across the room. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet, but I could feel the battle lines etched into the soil. The HOA had built their power on lies and intimidation, and now it was crumbling beneath them. But Sheriff Walker was right. Cornered animals lash out, and I knew Marjorie wasn't the kind of woman to go down without a fight. As I closed the binder and set it aside, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, "You picked the wrong man to bully. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning." For a few days after the sheriff's visit to the HOA office, things went strangely quiet. The flyers stopped appearing, the fake officers didn't return, and even Marjorie herself seemed to have vanished from sight. The sudden calm made me uneasy. It wasn't peace, it was silence before a storm. I knew these people weren't finished. They had too much pride, too much arrogance, and too much at stake to simply back down. I spent the quiet days repairing the fence by the garden and splitting firewood, but I never let my guard down. Every sound of gravel on the road set my nerves on edge. Every unfamiliar car that slowed near my driveway made me tense. Sheriff Walker had warned me they might retaliate, and I believed him. Sure enough, the retaliation came not with fists, but with paper. It was late afternoon when a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find a man in a suit standing on my porch, a briefcase in one hand and a thick envelope in the other. His smile was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Mr. Carter?" he asked smoothly. "That's me," I said, already bracing myself. He handed me the envelope. "You've been served. The Lakeview Homeowners Association is filing a civil lawsuit against you for harassment, defamation, and interference with community operations. Court date is in 30 days. Have a nice day." Before I could even respond, he turned and walked briskly down the steps, disappearing into a shiny black car parked at the end of my drive. The vehicle sped away, leaving me standing with the envelope heavy in my hands. I tore it open and skimmed through the pages. The HOA was accusing me of everything under the sun, harassing their members, spreading lies about their authority, and even slandering their reputation in town. It was laughable, but it was also serious. They weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were trying to bury me in legal trouble. My stomach twisted. I wasn't rich. I didn't have a team of lawyers sitting on standby. If this went to court, it would drain my even if I won. This was their tactic. Bleed me dry until I either surrendered or lost everything. That night, I called Sheriff Walker. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff. "Walker here. Sheriff, they just served me papers. A lawsuit. They're accusing me of harassment and defamation." There was a pause on the line, then a low sigh. I figured they might try something like that. It's a classic move. Turn the tables, make you look like the aggressor. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, pacing across the floor. "I can't afford a long legal battle." "Don't panic," he said firmly. "You've got the law on your side. The property records are clear. The impersonation charges are serious. I'll talk to the county attorney about what we found. In the meantime, don't let them scare you into backing down. That's what this is about, fear." I thanked him, but even after we hung up, sleep didn't come easy. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with possibilities. I wasn't just fighting for peace anymore. I was fighting for survival. The next blow came only 2 days later. I woke to find my mailbox torn out of the ground and smashed in the middle of my driveway. Spray painted across the side of my cabin. In dripping red letters were the words, "Get out." My chest tightened with fury. This wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was vandalism. They wanted me scared, rattled, ready to pack up and leave. But all it did was harden my resolve. I called the sheriff again, and this time deputies came out to photograph the damage. They dusted for prints, took notes, and promised to add it to the investigation. Still, I could see it in their faces. Catching whoever did it would be tough, and the HOA board would deny any involvement. Of course. That evening, I sat on my porch with a shotgun propped against the wall beside me. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I wasn't going to be caught off guard either. The sun dipped low. The crickets started their song, and for a long time, the world seemed quiet again. But my nerves stayed taut as a wire. A few days later, Marjorie finally made her reappearance. I was out near the pond, checking on the fence line, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I turned to see a sleek black SUV roll up. The window lowered, and there she was. Red blazer, crisp, lipstick perfect, her eyes sharp as glass. She didn't step out. She just leaned slightly toward the open window. "You should have taken my offer," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet field. I straightened, wiping sweat from my brow. "Your offer? You mean your threats? I told you before I don't answer to your Her smile was thin, humorless. "You think the sheriff will save you? You think some papers will change how things are done here? This community belongs to us, not you." "No," I said firmly, meeting her gaze. "This land belongs to me, including the ground under your office. And the law's on my side, Marjorie. Your time is running out." Her expression hardened, the smile vanishing. "You've made powerful enemies," she said coldly, "and men like you don't last long when they fight against the tide." Before I could reply, the SUV roared to life, spitting gravel as it tore down the road. I stood there, fists clenched, watching until it disappeared into the trees. That night I wrote everything down, every word, every threat, every incident. I added it to the growing binder, which now felt more like a weapon than just a stack of papers. If they wanted a war of attrition, I would fight it with truth and evidence. Still, fear gnawed at me in the quiet hours. Not fear of losing the land that I would never surrender, but fear of what they might do next. These weren't reasonable people. They were desperate, cornered animals, and cornered animals were dangerous. 2 weeks later, the county surveyors arrived. I watched as they drove stakes into the ground, marking lines, measuring boundaries with precision. By the end of the day, the results were undeniable. The HOA office sat squarely within my property line. There was no room for debate. The sheriff himself came out the next morning, his presence steady and reassuring. "It's official," he said. "Their office is trespassing on your land. And with the impersonation charges, we've got enough to take this to court on the criminal side." The county attorney is drafting the paperwork. Relief coursed through me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the HOA wouldn't take this quietly, and I was right. That evening, as I returned from town, I found smoke rising in the distance. Panic seized me as I raced down the dirt road, fearing the worst. When I reached my property, I saw it. The small shed by the garden, the one I had built with my own hands, was engulfed in flames. The fire crackled and roared, the heat scorching my face as I ran toward it. There was nothing I could do. By the time the fire department arrived, the shed was a pile of charred rubble, the garden blackened by smoke. Standing there in the glow of dying flames, I knew this was no accident. The HOA was sending a message: "We can destroy you." But as I looked at the ashes, something inside me shifted. Fear gave way to something stronger, sharper, resolve like steel. They had taken their shot. They had tried to break me. But all they had done was prove that they were exactly what I had claimed: criminals, bullies, cowards, hiding behind the mask of authority. I turned to the sheriff, who stood beside me, his jaw tight with anger. "Enough," I said, my voice steady. "It's time to bring them down." And I meant it. The war had escalated beyond words and intimidation. Now, it was about justice, and I was ready to see it through. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, because this land was mine, and I wasn't going anywhere. The day the sheriff's department returned to the HOA office, I knew it was going to be the breaking point. For weeks, tension had been building like a storm cloud that refused to release its rain. The president of the HOA had tried everything: letters, phony legal notices, even those fake officers that came to my door. But each move only dug them deeper into trouble, because with every threat, I collected evidence, and with every lie, I uncovered a bigger truth. What began as a personal battle to protect my peace had now become a full investigation into fraud, impersonation, and illegal land use. I stood at the edge of the parking lot that morning, watching as official sheriff's vehicles rolled in, their lights flashing red and blue against the beige walls of the HOA building. Real deputies stepped out this time, not the cheap imitators the HOA had sent to scare me weeks earlier. Their presence carried weight, authority that no fake badge could imitate. Neighbors started to gather around too, some whispering nervously, others standing with folded arms as if they had been waiting for this moment. Everyone seemed to know something big was about to happen. The HOA president, dressed in her usual sharp red blazer, stormed out of the office, heels clacking against the pavement. She tried to put on her usual air of confidence, but I could see the crack in her composure. Her eyes darted between the deputies and the growing crowd of neighbors. "This is harassment," she shouted, waving her hands dramatically. "You have no right to be here. This is private property, and you're trespassing." That was the moment I stepped forward. I carried the manila folder I'd been carrying for weeks: the deed, survey maps, and every legal document that proved the land belonged to me. I held it up and raised my voice so everyone could hear. "No, ma'am, this isn't your property. This is mine. That office you're standing in, that land you've been using to run your racket, it's all built on my land." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors exchanged wide-eyed glances, murmuring among themselves. Some nodded knowingly, as though they had suspected something like this all along but had been too afraid to speak out. The president froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once, she had no script, no smart retort, no smug smile to hide behind. The sheriff's deputy, a tall man with a calm but firm voice, stepped forward and addressed her. "We've reviewed the county records, ma'am. He's right. This office sits squarely on land he owns. That means your operations here have been conducted without permission, and that's a serious legal problem." Her face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. We've been here for years. Nobody ever said anything before. He's just trying to ruin us because he doesn't like the rules." I shook my head. "No, I'm standing up because you tried to scare me into joining your HOA with lies and fake cops. You pushed me, and now the truth is out. You don't get to bully people into submission when you're the one breaking the law." The deputies didn't waste any more time. They walked into the office and began seizing files, computers, and boxes of records. I saw one of them carry out a drawer stuffed with checks and envelopes. No doubt payments from neighbors who had been intimidated into handing over money. People in the crowd gasped as they realized just how much cash was flowing through the HOA's hands and how much of it might never have been used for community purposes. That's when the first neighbor, an older man with graying hair and a walking cane, stepped out from the group and spoke up. "They charged me fines for keeping a birdbath in my yard," he said. His voice trembled, but there was a strength in his tone. "They told me if I didn't pay, they'd sue me and take my home. I paid every penny. And now you're telling me it was all on land they didn't even own." Another woman chimed in, holding her toddler against her hip. They fined us for painting our fence the wrong color. They made us tear it down and rebuild it. We spent thousands of dollars, and they threatened to lien our house. How could they do that when they weren't even operating legally? One by one, the stories poured out. Neighbors who had been silent for years suddenly found their voices, each one adding fuel to the fire that was consuming the HOA's credibility. It was no longer just about me or my land. It was about an entire community that had been strong-armed and manipulated by people who thought they were untouchable. The HOA president's composure finally snapped. She lunged toward me, pointing a shaking finger in my face. You think you've won. You don't know what you've done. Without us, this neighborhood will fall apart. Property values will drop, crime will rise, and you'll all regret this. But her words no longer carried power. The neighbors booed her, some shouting back, others turning their backs completely. The deputies quickly moved between us, escorting her away as she continued to shout empty threats that nobody believed anymore. Watching her be led away felt like watching a crumbling tower finally collapse after years of standing tall on a hollow foundation. The investigation stretched into weeks. I met with county officials, lawyers, and law enforcement officers who wanted every detail about the HOA's activities. They uncovered layers of fraud in licensed security guards, misuse of funds, and false claims of authority. Every discovery seemed to confirm what I had felt from the beginning, that this was never about community or order. It was about control and greed. Eventually, the county issued a court order. The HOA office was to be dismantled, and the land restored to its rightful owner, me. I stood there the day the building was demolished, watching as the walls came down piece by piece. It was strange to see it fall. That building had been the center of fear for so many neighbors, a place where threats were issued and money was taken, and now it was just rubble being hauled away by trucks. The sight felt like justice itself, slow, deliberate, and unstoppable. Afterward, neighbors came to thank me. Some shook my hand, others brought pies or casseroles as tokens of gratitude. One man said softly, "You didn't just save your land, you freed us." Those words stuck with me. I hadn't set out to be a hero. All I wanted was peace. But sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for others too. When all was said and done, I finally had my land back, free of the HOA's shadow. I rebuilt the area where their office once stood, planting trees and wildflowers to restore what they had stolen. And for the first time since moving there, I sat on my porch in the evening and felt true quiet, not just the quiet of the land, but the quiet of knowing justice had been done. The HOA's leaders faced charges, and their influence crumbled. The fake cops, the fraudulent fines, the threats, all of it was exposed, and the community began to heal, no longer living under the weight of fear. As I watched the sunset one evening, I realized something important. Bullies only win when people stay silent. But when truth comes forward, no amount of intimidation can hold it back. Their empire had been built on lies, but the truth was mine, and it was stronger than anything they could throw at me. That was the end of the HOA's reign, and the beginning of real peace. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Bright Reality for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us bring you even more real and inspiring content.